Live. All right. Welcome to Legaltech Week for the first show of the new year. And I know it's been a quiet week so far, so I don't know if we're going to have much to talk about, but we'll see if we can come up with something to hit on. I'm Bob Ambrogi. I do the blog LawSites and the podcast LawNext, and our usual suspects are arrayed here before you today. You want to introduce yourselves? Molly, you want to start?
Sure. Molly McDonough. I'm a media strategist and a freelancer based in the Chicago area. I'm former editor and publisher of the ABA Journal.
And Victor?
Hi, my name is Victor Lee. I am assistant managing editor with the ABA Journal. I used to work for Molly. Happy 2021, everyone. Obviously, it's been a very slow year, just like we all thought it would, and I'm sure nothing else is going to happen over the course of a couple of weeks to change that. So,
all right, Joe.
Hey everybody, Joe Patrice from Above the Law here. We're joking about it being a slow week, but I actually did struggle to think of like legal tech things that happened because literally everything seems like a decade ago, and I mean from like Monday.
Right, I know it. Yeah, Victoria, how about you?
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria. I'm a reporter at Legaltech News, which is a publication owned by ALM. Sometimes you also see my byline at law.com, American Lawyer, and a few of our other publications, where you'll usually find me writing about cybersecurity and how lawyers are and usually not using technology.
All right, Zach.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Zach Warren. I'm editor-in-chief of Legaltech News, work with Victoria. Also find me at law.com and other ALM publications. I'm loath to say Happy New Year because it still feels like 2020 this week. So I'll say like Happy December 38th, 2020 to everybody.
And Caroline is our person from somewhere where maybe the world isn't quite so crazy right now. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. I'm in a hazmat suit hiding from the mutant coronavirus that we cause globally.
We're all doing that.
Caroline Hill, editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider. We've had a few bits of legal tech news this week in terms of everyone chose this week to announce that they were acquiring somebody else, which took me a little bit by surprise on the first week back. But my website's a bit broken at the moment, so you wouldn't be able to see it, but I'm happy to talk about it today.
There has been some legal tech news this week, actually. It's been a little bit less than I thought. And actually, some people on this call may even know, I think at least one company pulled off an announcement it was going to make this week, given everything that was going on. And they thought maybe this is not the right time to be making major news announcements. But, it's been such a weird week. I don't even know where to start. But I wondered if anybody just has any sort of general thoughts that they want to share in terms of the week that we just had, observations, thoughts, craziness, legal tech or not.
Pardon me while I throw up.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I mean, I think I speak for everybody, and like, can you really believe Ohio State took out Clemson like that? I mean, geez. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. So Wednesday was interesting. Hopefully, hopefully everybody who was listening to us and everything wasn't in DC and was fine. But it's been a crazy week, and I think I'm personally very excited to talk about whatever we're going to talk about here because it's been rough.
Yeah. I tried to think back. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, it just felt for me a little bit weird writing about legal tech, and you see what's going on in DC, kind of like. Right. There's bigger things going on in the world, but of course there's like things going on in legal tech. So it kind of felt like, weird writing about it when you see like the main down in DC.
Yeah.
And actually,
but we will have topics to discuss.
Sorry, you go, Victor.
Okay. To be fair, there are some legal tech elements of what happened in DC.
Right.
I mean, there are some things that, that as I'm sure we'll see, in the coming months, there will be aspects of legal tech that we can focus on with regards to what was going on. But yeah, I thought back to like what was the big story at the beginning of the week. It was Trump calling the Georgia Secretary of State, and that just seems so long ago now.
Wait a minute, I thought it was fast case acquiring case maker, but okay.
Well, yeah.
So you turn on the radio on this side of the pond, and I've learned more about the 25th Amendment than I've ever known. And Article 4, and I feel like fully sort of informed, because that's all as well. Anyone's talking about here as well, pretty much.
Yeah,
I think most all of us have learned more about the 25th Amendment than we ever thought about before.
I feel like I've learned a lot of things about what lawyers think the First Amendment says, which is fascinating too. It's really fun for me to watch real debates on First Amendment and between constitutional law professors, and then see the armchair Twitter lawyers spouting off about what's a First Amendment violation. It's amazing to me.
Or in some cases, Supreme Court clerks, spouting off about it.
Right. Or former ones too.
Yeah.
That was a joke.
I mean, that's actually one of the, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say that was a joke that I saw on Twitter this week, is every high schooler this year is going to nail their AP government exam because everybody knows all of the amendments at this point, at least through the past 4 years.
Yeah. But that actually, I mean, the point that we've all raised, both Molly and Victor raised in particular, is I think one of the interesting, perhaps legal tech consequences or issues here, whether it's legal tech, I don't know. I think Molly suggested we at some point talk about what is legal tech. I don't know what that even means anymore sometimes, but there has been, so much chatter this week about what should social media companies do about, quelling widespread misinformation. What should, whether the tech industry needs to be coming together in some way to kind of talk about this. Now, that's not a First Amendment, what you publish on Twitter, you don't have a First Amendment right to publish on Twitter, but it's a speech right. It is a free speech issue. And Victor, you had actually pointed to a particular, I think, article this week that kind of got into some of that, but and talked about the fact that social media really has a role here and to play in what happened this week, and that raises questions about what the response should be going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really interesting. Just and I mean, we talked a little bit about this before we came on the air. Just the fact that people one thing that I don't know if anything really made me laugh during the course of what happened Wednesday, but if anything did, it was like when the FBI sent out their message like, hey, anyone with tips, please let us know. I was like, well, were you not watching social media? People were broadcasting this stuff live. They were taking pictures of themselves in like Pelosi's office, like going through her mail, putting their feet on her desk, and like doing all these other. Like, there was a guy who carried out the speaker's podium and like got identified within 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Like it's just. To me, it was interesting just watching that, because then you had Twitter deciding to suspend Trump for I guess what really ended up being like a day, Facebook deplatforming him for 2 weeks, and it's interesting just to see that, and also in regards like the larger debate over Section 230 and whatnot, just how much freedom should these companies have, how, what kind of restrictions should they have. And like one thing that just in looking through and reading about what happened, looking at some of these other platforms out there like Parler and Gab and whatnot, they're kind of marketing themselves as like unrestricted alternatives to these really restrictive like Facebook, Twitter, like mainstream sites, and it'll be interesting to kind of see going forward, like, okay, well, does that what effect does it have going forward on sort of like user numbers, also the roles that like these platforms will play, any kind of restrictions that would have to come in, and just the role that they played in just even facilitating this. I mean, you saw like all these messages between people just openly calling for these kind of things, and like sometimes you have to kind of parse out what's serious and what's not serious. But if you're from a law enforcement standpoint, well, you got to investigate every single one of them, right? I mean, so just having to comb through all that data and having to decide what leads to fall and whatnot. I mean, I certainly don't envy them, but this is what they're supposed to do, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be so much more clarity, doesn't there? Like, so I was having a bit of a debate with most of my friends have gone completely mad and seem to have become conspiracy theorists. And, whereas I'm delighted when Trump is blocked by social media personally, we've had a lot of debates around the role of the power of social media in determining what is fact and what is not fact. And I think there's valid concerns there, isn't there? We've talked a lot here about responsibility, and there obviously is responsibility, but it also goes with that, kind of who becomes the judge, right? So we're now turning them into judges of what is fact and not. And as we know, if the last few weeks have taught us anything, it's that people don't agree on what's fact a lot of the time. It's not that clear.
Right.
And this has been the irony of this whole war that they want to have on Section 230, because Section 230, of course, protects the platform from the dumb things people say on the platform. And they're complaining about, well, and they're moderating me. That means that they are really taking it. So we got to get rid of Section 230. If you got rid of Section 230, all Twitter would do would more massively go after you and moderate you, because now they'd be on the hook for the stupid things you say.
Right.
Like, it's the dumbest fight for these people to pick.
Right.
Well, again, I mean, I kind of wonder how much of it is just them being told that, okay, well, Section 230 is bad. Section 230 is bad, because, and that's the other ironic thing that I found about this whole thing. Trump decided to pick a fight with Twitter and Facebook because he didn't like the fact that he couldn't just say whatever he wanted to. But like, chances are he probably wouldn't be president without those platforms. So, why are you picking this fight? Like, especially now? I mean, is it because now that you're about to transition to the private sector, that you can't just say whatever you want, and and would there be no consequences at all? So yeah, I almost wonder how much of it is just people being told over and over again, well, Section 230 is bad. Section 230 is bad because it's going to infringe on my freedoms, and it's going to do this and do that, and it's like, yeah, Section 230 is terrible. Let's get rid of it. Let's do this. So.
One of the things that I've really started to think about, especially after the pauses that Twitter and Facebook put on the president, is, what's more damaging to somebody or a business? Is it a political sanction, or is it not being able to communicate on these wildly popular forums? So I think that's a really interesting place to be for some of these folks. It's one thing if you get arrested and thrown in jail. It's another thing if you get a slap on the wrist and maybe some political blowback that actually would make you more popular on the social space. So being banned indefinitely from Facebook could be a bigger deal.
That's what I find so interesting. And Victor brought up Parler in particular, and I've been watching Parler for a little bit. So many of the people who are at the Capitol, that's where they posted it, is to Parler, not necessarily to Facebook or Twitter. And there's been so many calls, okay, well, Trump, if you get banned, why don't so many other Republican politicians just move to that platform? Well, that's not where the people are. The main thing for them isn't necessarily speaking to the base, it's speaking to the wider audience and either drawing more people into the base or explaining what the base's goals are. And you can only do that in a mass communication platform like a Twitter, like a Facebook. And there's kind of that back and forth of, oh, if you're Twitter or Facebook, then how do you respond to that when that is the explicit goal? It's really interesting.
Yeah. Steve, you had a post this week that is sort of tangentially related to what we're talking about here, because you were talking about the issue of online courts and how that throws open access to court proceedings in a way that we've never really seen before. You raised some questions about that I'm not sure how I feel about the questions you raised.
Well, yeah, and it was interesting. I showed the piece to somebody. And first of all, let me say, I actually drafted that Tuesday and Wednesday morning, and posted it like at noon, and didn't really think a whole lot about it after that. And then all hell broke loose that afternoon. So I wasn't predicting anything. It was just happenstance. But yeah, I had read an article by Alison Frankel, and she was talking about the technology trends, and one of the things she was saying is there's more and more access to courts and court proceedings, like the election proceedings that occurred in Pennsylvania and Georgia that attracted thousands of people listening in. More and more courts are now grappling with what do we do, because there is in this country the notion of public access to courts, and that's a valid point. I mean, that's how we keep the judiciary and the system honest, is by allowing the public access to see what's going on. When we were all, when you had to drive to the courthouse, park your car, sit in the courtroom all day, and hopefully, there'd be 20 minutes of testimony, that was one thing. Now, when anybody can see anything, anywhere, anytime, if they can do that, I'm not saying they can, but if they could, that poses a lot of questions. And I was thinking about it this afternoon. Many of you on the call probably remember the O.J. Simpson trial back in the 90s, which was publicly broadcast every day. It was really fascinating to watch, but I was thinking to myself, if that occurred today with social media and all the commentary, what would it look like? And I'm not sure it would be pretty. I think it could be pretty ugly. And the dangers, I think, run to the judges, to the witnesses, to the lawyers, to the courtroom personnel, to the jurors that could be involved and face all sorts of intimidation. And I think after I wrote it, somebody said, well, you pointed out a lot of problems. What's the solution? Like you, Bob, I don't have the solution, other than I think as a profession, the legal profession and the judiciary needs to begin grappling with this and needs to think about, okay, where do we draw the line between public access and protection of the integrity of the system and the credibility of the system? The judicial conference, is going to begin allowing live streaming, but not for jury trials and not for proceedings that involve witnesses, which, may be an appropriate line to draw. I don't know. But the online world isn't going away. Online court proceedings aren't going away. And to think, well, when we all get back to normal, we won't have to worry about this. I don't think that's correct. I think it is something that we have to worry about. What would happen when some of the people involved in the riots in Washington were to go to trial and the court were to say, we're going to live stream the whole trial? Good God.
Well,
we could see the same scene play out again.
It's right. And it brings up the issues that I think you touched on a little bit in your post. I mean, I think this goes really to the heart of privacy and security of the courts and the court process. And I know they're not talking about doing live streaming gang trials, but, we were already having issues with witness intimidation and jury intimidation, which is one reason that cell phones have been banned from some of these cases in courthouses. So this is going to be an issue that's going to have to be dealt with.
But it is being dealt with. I mean, I my day job, I represent newspapers. I deal with a lot of these issues all the time of trying to keep courts open for reporters and open for journalists and open for the public. And I mean, to the extent to many of the courts that are already live streaming trials in one way or another have procedures in place to, basically the judge is controlling the camera. They can turn the camera on and off. They can decide what parts of it should be broadcast or what parts should not be broadcast. There are a lot of constraints in place already, or protections rather in place already. It's an interesting question because, we're all for transparency until it gets too transparent and then we start to worry about it. And where do you draw the line on that? I remember, I'm old enough to remember, when Court TV first launched, there was another one that launched at the same time. I forget, Arthur Miller and some other people had tried to launch one around that time, just kind of showing courts live all day long, and what they found out very quickly was that people were bored as heck watching these things and preferred not to do it. But we're still going to get, whether they live stream or not, many courts now have cameras in the courtroom, and we still have the evening news clips of defendants being arraigned and people testifying and all of that. If there is a threat to, if there's a potential threat to somebody's safety or security as a result of that, I think that's something the judges can deal with and take appropriate steps without necessarily having to come up with a hard and fast policy around it.
Yeah, I don't know, Bob. To some extent, it and maybe it's because in my years as a litigator, I saw lots of things happen in the courtroom that I thought were unfair, because they hurt my client mainly, but
like that time your objection got overruled.
Yeah. I can't imagine my objection, but leaving it to individual judges, sort of on a carte blanche. Okay, you can decide, Judge Ambrogi, what happens in your courtroom, and most judges are honest, they're diligent, they do their jobs, but particularly in those systems where judges are elected, what could that mean? What could that generate? And I think it's, it's time to, I think where I ended up in the piece, as I said before, is it's something that the judiciary needs to grapple with. What rules should apply to social media posting with respect to ongoing trials and proceedings? What are we going to allow to happen in a courtroom, be seen in a courtroom? You guys, I remember, and I think it's some courts still, there's no photography, so you'd have these artists sort of drawing, these nice pictures, and to some extent it's kind of interesting because you could see, how their interpretation of what the witness was looking at. But I just think that, somewhere we need to be thinking about some guidelines sort of across the board for certainly.
They have, but a lot of
courts.
states have state guidelines on cameras in the courts that talk about what kinds of proceedings can be broadcast and what powers a judge has to turn the camera on or off. I know Massachusetts has a pretty extensive rule on that, and I know that other states, I can't cite you the other states as well, but I know that other states do. So to some extent that's being dealt with, but you're right. It needs to be, there need to be clearer guidelines around it, but I would hate to see those guidelines be such that they do inhibit the public access. I think public access is
That's
really
right.
the fundamental core of our judicial system.
It's important. I don't mean to belittle the importance of that right, if you will, or that principle, because that keeps the system honest in a lot of ways. It was just much easier when you had to actually go and sit in the courtroom, right?
Right. Yep.
But let's be honest, like no matter how much transparency there is, it's still not going to be enough for some people, because you could watch a trial and just see people do a sidebar, but what are they talking about? Are they making a secret deal? Are they doing this? And then the judge goes, oh well, and then if something gets excluded, well, why did they exclude that? Or why can't we see that and whatnot? So, I almost wonder if sometimes like the laws, the rules of the court and whatnot are just so arcane and so not, they might not be so obvious to people that they might not understand really what's going on, and it might just fuel a lot of preconceptions that they might have about justice not being fair, or things being rigged and whatnot, and certain things being in the tank for other people. So I almost kind of feel like, well, you're not going to please everybody no matter what you do.
Yeah, and it's particularly in where you have an elected judiciary. See, it's easy to imagine a judge limiting public access and then just being excoriated in social media and elsewhere for doing that. That would put pressure on him, fearing for his job at the next election. That would then, make him maybe more willing to allow greater access or lesser access, depending on. Probably on the side of greater access more than lesser. And it's, again, it's just a question. It's something that I worry about, particularly now that we saw the results of this week, because, the integrity and credibility of our judiciary is sort of the last bastion of that kind of respect and credibility to the extent it still exists. And we have to be careful with that, I think.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're right. Well, there was some other legal tech news this week that maybe we should talk about, or there was not other legal tech news. There was some legal tech news this week that maybe we should talk about. I'd probably kick it off at talking about the fast case casemaker merger, just because, man, when I heard about that, I got to say my jaw dropped. I never saw that coming, and I think it really could be have a significant impact on the legal research market in this country. I mean, according to the fast casemaker people, they now have their combined subscriber base is something north of 1 million lawyers. The ABA puts the total number of lawyers at 1.3 million. That always seems a little conservative to me, but whatever, even it's 1.4, they've got a huge subscriber base. Now that doesn't mean all those people are actually using the product, but they have access to it through their bar association memberships. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of that. There's potentially, sort of a monopolistic bad that could come out of it too, I think, in terms of does this in any way inhibit some of the startups, the legal research startups that are out there, that are coming along. I know I put that question to Ed Walters, and he said, not at all, because we've made a point of supporting a lot of these startups. A lot of them get their cases and whatnot through us, and we support them in any number of ways. But all the more, that's all the more control that they have over the market in a sense. So I think it's a good thing overall, but I think it's something that it'll be interesting to see what the consequences are as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it's particularly interesting too, coming off the heels of everything that happened with Ross and Thomson Reuters. And at the time we were asking the question, so where is that middle for legal research? Can you be something other than a startup or just one of the largest companies in general? How do you get from one end to the other? And Fast Case has grown a lot, but I think especially pre-deal, a lot of people were saying it didn't have the scale of Thomson Reuters, Lexis, Bloomberg. So from that standpoint, and especially seeing what happens to that middle, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for Fast Case to try and get as much scale as humanly possible and get that $1 million, or not $1 million, million subscribers that they claim. How exactly that all shakes out in the wash, and whether that puts them at the same level or by pure subscribers, maybe even above Westlaw, Lexis, et cetera, we'll see. But from that standpoint, I think it makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint.
Yeah. I guess we lost Caroline, right? She disappeared for a while, and now she seems to be gone altogether. But
no, I think she just legal panel did. I don't know. How do you do that?
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Well, I guess for me, one thing that I was kind of curious about, and I'd asked my reporter to look at, because we wrote it up after it happened. One thing I asked my reporter was, just try to find out, okay, because looking at this, just your piece, Bob, and then just the press release, it sounded more like an acquisition, not quite like a merger. Because Ed's still in charge. The casemaker people are going to join the Fast Case board. That usually smells like an acquisition, not so much a merger of equals. But so I asked my reporter to ask about that, and he was like, oh well, they were kind of like, oh, it's a merger, it's not an acquisition, blah blah blah. I was like, well, yeah, of course they're going to say that. But so yeah, it really smelled to me more like like just more of an outright purchase. But I haven't seen the details of it and whatnot. But yeah, I do think it definitely shows like like a statement of intent, I guess, from Fast Case, that they did like just looking at all the acquisitions that they had over the last couple of years. I mean, they're really growing at a pretty fast clip, and Fast case, fast clip. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what this does, and does this kind of cause? Because I remember when we had Ed on a couple months ago, I guess. I think we had asked, oh, like, so what's next for you? And he was a little bit cagey and kind of like, I'm not really sure, blah blah blah. So, but I do wonder if this kind of kind of puts the brakes on things a little bit, or just kind of slows things down for them. Just because now they have a lot of integration they got to do. They have a lot of things they have to work out and whatnot. So would this kind of slow things down for them, or is it just step one of like the four step plan to for total domination? Who knows?
Yeah,
I don't think there's any place to slow down in any of this, because they have to stay ahead of the technology that's going to allow competitors to keep coming into the market. So
yeah, I will give myself a shameless plug here, which is that I have a episode of my LawNext podcast coming out Monday, where I've got I talked to Ed Walters and Phil Rosenthal, the two co-founders of Fastcase, and Satish Sheth, who's the CEO and president of Casemaker, and they all got on the call together and talked about what this all means. I think, Victor, you're right. It smells a little more like an acquisition than a merger, and in a way that's kind of the way I think it's going to sort of play out. But either whatever you call it, the impact is kind of the same. I mean, you get the resources and the technology and the staff of both companies come together into a combined company, and with everything each of them independently brought to that deal, and together you've got a pretty substantial company with a lot of different facets to it.
Of course, you never know, but from Fastcase and maybe Casemaker's standpoint too, better to have this kind of combination than have one of them gobbled up by LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters, because that would make whoever's left in the marketplace competition challenge that much greater. It's already pretty great given the size of those two, well, three, I guess, when you count Bloomberg. So I think it's a good thing, and probably, maybe is a saving a competitor and two competitors into one, saving a competitor in the field that might not otherwise have been saved at the end of the day.
Yeah, and supposedly I think they said this, that this came out of the litigation they were involved in over the Georgia administrative code, and there's sort of a point at that litigation where they kind of said, why are we fighting against each other when we could do so much better if we just kind of joined forces and tilted tilted at some other giants in this battle. I'm mixing some metaphors there, I think. Anyway, there were a couple of other acquisitions this week. I don't know if they were sort of potentially, if the long-term impact of them is necessarily as significant, but there was Latera making yet another acquisition. It's been on kind of a roll lately, and this time getting Foundation Software Group, which kind of moves it into a whole other area of product than it had before, in a sense, into kind of business intelligence and firm intelligence, and then Relativity's acquisition of Virtue, which my biggest problem was I kept misspelling Virtue in my blog post. For some reason, I couldn't get it right. I don't know what my problem was. But I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts on any of those? Or
I'm just glad to hear somebody else misspells things in their blog posts besides me.
Oh yeah, believe me.
Well,
I've got a whole army of editors out there who let me know as soon as I do.
Well, it's hard with tech companies. Very often you have it's like you have like lowercase companies, or one where it's like a combination of a word, but then like maybe some like it'll be like weird capitalization rules. So yeah, I've done it. I'm sure we've all done it at some point.
Yeah.
And there was a deal that actually fell through that was announced. Redgrave, the Ediscovery boutique. It's I think it's supposed to be a merger with the law firm Nelson Mullins. that fell through. And they said because of client issues, I think they had some client issues there and they couldn't get it resolved. And one of my colleagues at the American Lawyer, they just posted an article, I believe today, about like those types of deals falling through so late in the game is kind of rare. But usually, like if a deal is going to break down, it is like because there's client conflict. So I thought that was kind of interesting, like a large law firm trying to like bolster up his e-discovery abilities and that deal.
Yeah.
I was surprised by that. Why I didn't really understand kind of how this was going to be leveraged and why the firm didn't splinter off a separate entity to have this part of the business, because that seems safer to do for client conflict reasons.
I do think that the Redgrave was going to be acquired by a subsidiary, but it was just like some like high profile client matters, and it just said they couldn't resolve it. And they said, we're not going to give up those clients, so we'll just kibosh the deal.
Yeah, they would have been part of the Encompass Nelson Mullins subsidiary, which is particularly e-discovery and information governance focused. But now they are not.
Yeah. Well, also on the, I guess also on the question of, this actually relates maybe back to our discussion with Steve about court information going out to the public. Joe, you were going to talk, you brought up this issue of another wonderful hacking this week, or what we learned about one.
So it's really a testament to how this week was, that we learned this on Wednesday, and I didn't really get around to digging into it till Friday because gestures wildly. Yeah, so in early December, actually, we learned that there was a hack of government computers as well as several other companies, but this SolarWinds hack, which was basically, it is not real, I guess we haven't proven it, but the intelligence community has blamed Russia, and that Russia launched a cyber attack against the US, which it did by kind of Trojan horsing it through a vendor. So they took over basically the vendor's software, and then the vendor would sell it to the government and all these companies, and then it would exist there for a while. Eventually, they would force in an update that would introduce some malware, and then they had kind of the Russians had backdoor access to all these things. There were a lot of obviously more important things that they got access to, but we learned on Wednesday that, and this has been going on for a few weeks now, we learned on Wednesday that one of the sources that they had access to was the federal court system. So there's some Russian agent somewhere poring over the minutia of some declaration that somebody wrote about a noise complaint, and I don't know, whatever. The point is, there's a lot of dumb stuff in our federal system. However, there are, trade secret cases and stuff like that, and these highly secure documents that are things that espionage might want to get their hands on. It appears as though they've been able to get their hands on it, and dating back to estimates suggest maybe even as early as March. So right now, the court system is saying that if you have something highly secretive that you can't hand out, you need to go back to paper. So we're back to paper. That'd be exciting for a lot of the older lawyers out there. And yeah, everybody who prints out their emails and writes on them and sends them back via interoffice mail, this is your moment. But don't worry, everybody. It still costs $2 billion to have Pacer be free. So
when they say paper, though, so even paper now is digitized at some point. So what does that mean? Are we going? Are all the courts going to have to get back to secure fax machines and
the mimeograph? Just do the thing.
Well, so my theory is, my understanding of it is, which obviously this is very new. This announcement was just first made that this was going on Wednesday. So I don't really know what they're going to choose, but it seems as though the problem is in with a piece of kind of like IT monitoring software that's on these systems. So if you don't put this through the electronic docketing system, one would think it would be safe from this. So if you just wrote this document in Word and mailed it to people, that would not trigger this problem. It's that they've infiltrated basically the server. So you can keep it off of that. And yes, you're using digital you're using software to create it and so on, but you aren't going through the pathway that this would be a problem of. SolarWinds claims that they've got a patch that fixes it, so this may be a short-lived change, but I'm sure they're gonna hold this for a while just till they're sure.
Yeah, some of the reports that I heard, and there was a really good podcast by Leo Laporte. I think it's one of his podcasts on the SolarWind hack, and one of the problems is not only patching it, but finding out all the holes that have been created, some of which are very difficult to spot and could be years before they all come to light, given the nature of what SolarWind was providing. And it goes to show that the whole supply chain kind of end of security is problematic in a lot of ways, because you can certainly control your own house, but you can't control necessarily who's bringing the stuff to your house. You can ask all the questions you want, but nevertheless, the security is a significant problem in a supply chain environment that we all live in.
Yeah, the easier way would have just been to give all these documents to one of these big firms and ask them to go ahead and block out see if they knew how to properly redact these documents and get the secrets just as easily. We've seen so many cases of these, federal court PACER documents revealing secret information just because they weren't properly redacted. But this is obviously has potential ramifications well beyond that.
I don't know, Joe could be right. There's probably some poor Russian sitting down reading all this stuff. What do these people do? Why do they do this?
Yeah.
This is insane.
Yeah. Well, they're still trying to figure out how they screwed up the election, so they got to work on that first, and then go back and.
Well, they can read the Kraken lady's latest file.
Yeah.
So what else do we have here? We got Victoria. You did have some. Oh, you talked about it. The Nelson Mullins.
Yes, the
Alright.
Nelson Mullins.
Molly,
Molly,
did
also
you-
with
Joe.
to Joe's point, I also thought it was interesting. They said, your confidential filings, either paper-based or through a thumb drive. And I was like, I haven't seen the word thumb drive since high school, but I was like, you can always go to Staples and, get your thumb drive.
I got a drawer of them if you want them. Molly, what did you have this week?
I had a couple things. One was a conversation Steve and I were involved in earlier today, which was just somebody threw out a question: what is legal tech? And it's a really interesting. I posted your article on Zach on new law because I thought that had a good formula for defining new law that could be used for defining legal tech as well. And you went a little bit back to talk about technology and applied to legal in that piece. But it was interesting because the definition the person that was on the lunch was using, on Ari Kaplan's virtual lunch was using, is that it's any technology that touches legal, which is anything. So Zoom is legal tech, Microsoft is legal tech, anything is legal tech. And, for me, it's contextual. And what it means for the narrow audience, and it definitely makes a difference in what it means in terms of raising money for a startup, whether you're big tech or niche legal oriented, and or whether you're big enough to have a vertical that's just devoted to tech. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting question, and came up a little bit on a separate question that Joe sent around a few days ago too, on what's emerging tech.
Right. Did you come up with an answer?
I thought man, she's not here to defend herself, but I thought Nikki sent around a useful scholarly article that had kind of a guide for what emerging would be. In this instance, the question I sent around was very specific. It was, somebody had said, well, we're designated as an emerging tech by an organization. And I was like, I've never heard that organization put a rubber stamp of this is emerging and this isn't. So I was like, has anybody heard of that? And that's why we got into this more broadly philosophical question ultimately.
Yeah. To me, this question gets really interesting also just because, just for myself and what I write about, because it used to be, and we've talked about this on the show before, I think, but there was a time, and I'm old enough to remember that time when tech and law practice were kind of off in separate worlds, and there was some overlap somewhere in the middle. But you could practice law without using tech at all, and except for typewriters and telephones or something. But we are at a point when there is essentially 95%, if not 100% overlap between technology and law practice. And so it makes it that much more complicated to talk about, for me to sometimes to think about what should I be writing about on my blog? What do I cover? What don't I cover? What are the right topics? And I tend to think about it more, more broadly. I do try and focus on legal tech as opposed to Microsoft Office or something, but sometimes Microsoft has made major attempts to do things in the legal industry, and then that's something that we cover. So it's just a really fascinating question. I don't think there is no right answer. It's a judgment call, but
it is interesting. As most of you know, I teach or did teach a 2.5-day intensive sort of training program for lawyers to use trial presentation sorts of technologies. And there's, as we start that, there is some of the people that come into it have this sort of idea that it must be technology, legal technology, when in fact most of the tools that we use have nothing to do with legal. They're Notability and their video and PowerPoint, and there's all these tools that lawyers can use that have nothing to do with, are not necessarily for legal tech, but are fundamental to the way that they practice their craft. At least should be fundamental, the way they practice their craft.
Yeah.
It's interesting if you think about it too, like even something that you would consider stereotypical, quote unquote, legal tech, like cybersecurity. All major law firms have cybersecurity vendors that they work with, but ask who's the biggest legal tech security vendor, you're not really going to get an answer, because a lot of them are enterprise by nature, because security is translatable across pretty much any professional service. So personally, I tend to go more broad. I would count that legal tech because it is for professional services that is highly used in the legal function. But if you went to a lot of these security companies, even that you'll see at like a Legal Week or ILTA, they probably wouldn't call themselves legal tech because they tend to like try and have their market be a little bit more expansive than that.
Yeah, I mean, you could take, for example, TrialPad, which, and I've had this debate with the lawyers before, TrialPad, that's just for trials. Well, no, it's for any sort of presentation. And in fact, it could be used by anybody that's going to give a presentation, an accountant or, somebody in a corporate sales department. It is that broad of a tool. Yet most of us, if we're asked, is that a piece of legal technology? We say, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had Jules Miller on my other podcast, my LawNext podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she is, a former legal tech founder herself, who is now a venture investor, and she's starting to get her firm to do more investing in legal tech, and yet her position is that the tech that interests her is tech that has the potential to go across verticals and across industries. She's looking for tech that maybe it's emerging out of the legal world, but she's looking for tech that's going to have applicability in other industries and other verticals as well, because that's the tech that could potentially, be $1 billion company someday.
Just like with all the tools that have come from, the accessibility needs of various people that created all these things we all use frequently, even today, have gone well beyond that market.
Yeah. Also, I think, Mark Palmer's made the point in the comments about the fact that the so-called duty of tech competence in the model rules doesn't say legal tech, it says tech. And whether, I don't know whether Mark would agree with me on this, but I often make the point that the duty does not just mean you need to understand how to use, kind of the tech that comes up in your own office or in your own practice, but you have to understand your client's tech too. And a lot of the ethics opinions that have come down around this really focus on, a lot of them come out of the Ediscovery arena where, they talk about the fact that a lawyer needs to be able to understand how their clients store data and transmit data and communicate electronically, and what kinds of files they have within their businesses or homes or whatever. And none of that is necessarily legal tech. Maybe some of it is, but you really have to have even something as simple as needing to have a fundamental understanding of social media and in order to represent clients properly these days. So,
of course, there's that famous quote that somebody came up with, that we're approaching the point where it might be malpractice not to use data analytics. I don't, some really smart person came up with that. I can't remember who it was.
Your brilliant quote, Steve.
No, it was yours, Bob.
All right. What else did we have? Anything else this week? I don't think there was. Was there anything else anybody wanted to talk about this week?
I mean, I didn't have anything specific. I like predictions, and we've run a bunch of predictions this week. So I thought it might be fun, especially as this is the first show of the new year, to go around and see if anybody has any big 2021 predictions for legal tech at all.
Well, don't leave us hanging, Zach.
Well, when I was thinking about it, particularly with a lot of the litigation and political litigation that I think we're probably going to see this year and that has already begun. Last time that we saw a lot of this litigation, Ediscovery actually became a story. Like I remember leading up to the 2016 election, so many people are saying, how could they possibly look through Hillary's emails in a weekend? And yes, that is kind of what Ediscovery does. I think you're going to see Ediscovery be general circ news once again, in some fashion this year, whether it's combing through emails or cell phones or WhatsApp or what have you. A lot of people having questions about how exactly they get a key piece of data, how you analyze it, how it is applicable to courts and how courts accept it. I don't know where that will come from, but I am predicting that will happen at some point this year.
While I have you, I forget whether, I don't know who it was, but somebody at law.com posted an article this week on predicting or not predicting, but talking about whether we will get back to having live conferences this year. I think that was on law.com, wasn't it?
That was Frank, yeah.
Yeah, Frank, okay. What do you think?
I think second half. At least that's just me personally. I know, I see Steve shaking his head already. I don't think they're going to be huge blowouts, but I also think, like, say ILTA will try everything in their power to have some in-person component. So whether there will be in-person conferences, I say yes. Whether they will be the conferences that we knew pre-2020, probably not that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was shaking my head because I think we may see, conferences where some small group of people, the leadership of the organization, gather at one physical place, and the rest is virtual. And it's it's complicated because not only is you have to consider the risk, but you also have to consider the economics. How what appetite will people have for it, unless we're really safe. And there also there's the component of all the people that have been reached that were never reached before. So there's a lot of considerations. I agree with you, Zach. We may see some smaller pieces of it 2021, but I think it will be a long time before we see the huge shows again, and not just in the legal arena, but elsewhere. CES is coming up this week, and it's all virtual, and it's hard to imagine how an international conference could take place anytime soon.
Yeah. There's the Legal Services Corporation's conference. Their technology conference is next week. Also, if you haven't signed up for that, it's a great conference. Anybody else want to make predictions?
I think we're going to see more online trials and proceedings. And I think we're going to get to it. And I had a friend out on the West Coast who has started a 3-week online jury trial. And they got to it because the two sides sat down together with the judge, and the judge was basically, look, we can have an online trial and resolve this matter this year, or we can have an in-person trial. And it may be, I got to tell you, I've got 35 cases in front of you, 40 cases in front of you. Who knows? And both sides said, we got to get this over with. We can't have this hanging over our heads the next 4 years. So I think there's going to be more and more pressure to do that. And, the in-person trials that take place have fundamental problems with them. You get this sort of idea that, I can't read the jury's body language on a Zoom call. It's also pretty hard to read their body language when they're 50 yards away from you at the same time. So I think lawyers and judges are starting to say, if we can't go back and do it exactly like we could before, maybe online is better than in person in a lot of ways. So that's my thought about where we might be headed.
I'll just throw out because of the increase in online communications and uses by courts, I expect more empowerment of and creation of roles for court navigators on the tech front, if not on some of the practice front.
Interesting.
I think we'll still continue to see more lawyers and their law firm staffers, corporate legal departments still working from home, not going into the office at the same rate that they did like pre-2020, especially if clients aren't demanding it.
Yep. Anything else, Joe? You want to venture any?
Yeah, I was actually kind of thinking the exact same line as Victoria. I was thinking that for anybody whose office leases are coming up this year, I think there's now a completely different worldview of what your next office is going to look like for exactly those reasons. I think it's going to become part of the thinking of the next facility. How do we make it so that we can be at home? And hopefully, this is, knocking on wood, but something that I'm going to stress. Hopefully this comes along with firms being more generous with the concept of tech stipends, because they're now going to start really asking their associates to be working remotely, and partners too, frankly, but everyone to be working remotely. And they should be more generous on setting folks up that way.
Yeah.
There's such a huge financial savings that can be accomplished. So it's no longer going to be, our younger people are clamoring to work at home. It's going to be more, the firm management is clamoring for you to work at home. We want to cut this real estate costs down, but we don't need.
Victor, you want to be a Nostradamus here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with, I mean, kind of talked about earlier with just, the social media platforms, but also with Google, whether the antitrust investigations against them stick, whether or not there's going to be any kind of action on that. I mean, these kind of things take a long time anyway. And, with the incoming administration, there might be some disruption in any kind of investigations that they're doing. But I think one of them is a state investigation, so that wouldn't be affected. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with those things. I mean, I don't anticipate anything like, breaking up of Google or, breaking up of Facebook or anything like that. I mean, I think we're kind of past the days when like the Justice Department would weigh in with draconian penalties like that. I mean, just even with the Obama administration, like, they might have been a little bit more aggressive with certain antitrust deals, but they weren't breaking up companies, or they were giving out huge fines and whatnot. So I would kind of anticipate that would kind of be the way things would be with the incoming administration too. But I don't have any special insight into that.
Well, whenever anybody asks me to make predictions, I always say that, if last January I had made any predictions, all of them would have been entirely 100% wrong. So I don't make predictions. I will predict that 2 major legal research companies will merge in 2021. And we'll see if that comes true and if any of these other predictions come true, and we'll talk about them here if that happens. But thanks everybody for this, and we will be back next week, same time, same place, and see what the news brings next week.
So long, everybody.
See
Have a
y'all.
good weekend.
Bye, everybody.